I'm good. I'm digital. All right, how we doing, MEL team? Get excited. So today we are looking at metric and imperial measurements. So I'll walk you through this, and you can get doing what you're doing there. So, there we go. So, that shouldn't have happened. Okay, so here's the note you'll have today, lesson 3.1, taking measurements. And really quickly, let's recall how we measure things with like a metric ruler. So using a metric ruler, which of course means we're talking about centimeters and millimeters, and I suppose maybe meters if we were talking about a meter stick, and they are all decimal, which means that you will read to the nearest whole number, and then each tick after that whole number is just a decimal. First tick after would be 0.1, second tick after 0.2, and so on and so forth. So here we would say the nearest whole number is 24, so this will be 24, but then it's not spot on 24, we're one tick past that, so it would be 24.1 centimeters. All right, I'll give you a moment to try the one underneath, and then we'll take it up. So again, here we can see that the nearest measurement is 51 centimeters, but it's not exactly on 51. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ticks past that, so we would say 51.5 centimeters. And of course, we know that 0.5 is exactly in the middle, and so that's 51.5 centimeters is another way you can say it. But in metric, typically we wouldn't say 51.5 or anything like that. We just stick to using decimal places for consistency's sake. So 51 centimeters. So I'm going to ask you to get a metric ruler and complete each of these measurements here. We're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that here, but you have to get that done because I'm going to look at that in your notes. So get each of those measured. And on this page here, pick the most appropriate measurement for each of these things here. And again, I'm not going to do that with you because you can do all this. So all that should be tasks that you do on your own. And that should feel pretty much like review. If you need help with any of that, please feel free to come over and ask me for help, and I'll be glad to give it to you. But the thing today that might be a little bit tricky for you, something you may or may not have a lot of practice with, is measuring with imperial measurement. So in the metric system, centimeters are divided into 10. So like, and as a result, we're talking decimals. Centimeters are divided into decimals. But in the imperial system, they just keep cutting things in half. They would say 1.5 inches or 2.5 inches or 11.5 inches. But then they might cut that again and say quarters, 3.25 inches, 2 3/4. And then they can do that for eighths and down to sixteenths and keep going, 32nds, 64ths. In this class, the most we're going to deal with is a ruler that goes down to sixteenths. So if you look here, if you look at a ruler and it's just got a little dash between each inch, then we would call that a ½ inch. And those quotation marks represent inches, by the way. Here, you can see they still have the ½ inch, but they've also got these littler measurements here, and those represent quarters. So that's 1/4. That's 2/4, but a better way to say 2/4 is to say a half. That's 3/4, and that's a full inch there. So if something were this long, we would say it was 3/4 of an inch long. Now, if we cut each of these in half again, we don't want to change the way we talk about these measurements. So this measurement right in the middle, we still call that a half. We could call that 1, 2, 3, 4/8, but 4/8 is a silly way to say a half. Likewise, we still want to call this a quarter, and we want to call that 3/4. We could call this 2/8, but that's a silly way to say a quarter. So it's only in these smallest new ticks put between that we're going to go even smaller. And this one here would be an eighth. Like we said, that's 2/8, but 2/8 is just a quarter. That's 3/8, That's 4/8, but again, 4/8 is just a half, so we're going to say that. That's 5/8. This one here would be 6/8, but again, that's a silly way to say 3/4. And here we'd call that 7/8. So you can see every time we cut it in half, it's only the middle ones that have to get a new name. And then, oh boy, and I'm going to color code this actually, and I'm going to make the half red every time, and that way it'll be like consistent. Okay, and if we go here, this is still a half. That's still 1/4, and that's all, 3/4, not 1/4. And then we just did all of the eighths, so that's n/8. A quarter is 2/8. That's 3/8. A half is 4/8. That's 5/8. 3/4 is 6/8. That's 7/8. And if we needed something smaller than that still, we could go between the eighths. And what we can put between the eighths are 16ths. So the first one here would be 1/16. We're going to skip 2/16, but that would be 3/16. We're going to skip 4 because, again, there's a better way to say that, but this would be 5/16. 6/16, better way to say that, but this would be 7/16. Much better way to say 8/16, we just call that a half. But 9/16 you'll write sometimes. 10/16, better way. 11/16, better way to say 12, but here's 13/16. 14 is better expressed as 7/8. But then we could have 15/16. All right, and that's to the nearest 16th. This one here was to the nearest 8th. Now note, you should never have an even number on top. If you can, there's a better way to write it. Right? For example, if you had 2/16, well, the better way to write 2/16 is an eighth. If you had 4/16, well, 1, 2, 3, 4/16. A better way to write 4/16 is a quarter. If you had 14/16, well, a better way to write that is 7/8. So anytime you have an even number on top, there's a better way to write it. All right, and that's the main lesson from today. After that, we just need to get some practice in. So I will do this page with you. We can do it together. My advice would be to pause the video and try it on your own, and then check it with me, but you know, whatever, you do you. And then the page after this, you should do on your own. I should say that, some people find this pretty tricky. You know, if you have a lot of experience, if you've spent a lot of time in the shop, or if you've spent a lot of time building things, then this will probably come pretty naturally to you. And if that's something you don't have a lot of experience with, you may find this really tricky. And that's okay. Just get some practice. Come to me for help if you need it. Let's take a look. So here, we can start by measuring whole inches. And we can note that like anything between 0 and 1 is got no whole inches. But anything between 1 and 2 is 1 whole inch and then some fraction. This line here is right at 2 inches exactly, but this is 2 and some fraction. This is 3 and some fraction, and this is also 3 and some fraction, and it doesn't hurt to kind of look at that first. Now, what are the fractions? Well, this whole ruler only goes into halves and quarters. There's no eighths, there's no 16ths. So you can just count over. You can say, okay, well, that is 1/4 over. So that one's just 1/4. You could say 0 and 1/4, but that's kind of clunky. And this line here, well, it's 1, 2, 3/4 over. All right, that's pretty straightforward. What about this one here? Well, this is 1 and then 1/4, 2/4. But remember, right in the middle, we just call that a half. So really this is 1 and 1/2. If those are quarters and those are halves, one way to think about it is just count right past the quarters. That's just 1/2. So that is 1 1/2. This is 2 exactly, so we don't need to worry about that. This one here is 2, and again, if that's a quarter and that's a half, we could count that as 2 quarters, but better just to say it's 2 1/2. This here is 3 1/4. And this one here is 1/4, 2 quarters, also known as a half, 3 quarters. So that is 3 3/4. And this kind of trick where we count, and if we need the small divisions, we kind of draw this little line where we're counting all the small ones. Whereas if we need the bigger divisions, we can count above those and only get those. I'll kind of teach you that trick. With a bit of practice, it's helpful. All right, now this ruler here, the last one only went to the nearest 1/4 inch, but this one has halves. It also has quarters, but it also has eighths. So this measurement right here is actually just 1/8 of an inch. Which means if we wanted this measurement here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eighths of an inch. And you can see how we just count along like that. And again, if you want to kind of measure this or mark this as a half, a quarter, and an eighth to kind of help yourself as you go, not a bad idea. So if you look here, when we measure this, I don't have to go through the quarter, eighth. I could say that's 2/8, and I wouldn't be wrong. There's a better way, because since it is longer than the eighths, just count along, it's the first quarter. And we're after 1 whole inch, so it's a whole inch and a quarter more. This one here, again, I could count it as a number of eighths. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, and 1 whole inch to begin with. No, it's okay. I'm sorry, I'm being annoying here. But there's a better way, because since it's longer than the eighths, let's not count it as eighths. Let's count it as quarters. 1/4, 2 quarters, 3 quarters. So it's a whole inch and 3 quarters more. This one here is easy. It's exactly on 2 inches. So that is 2 inches. What about this one here? Well, now we do have to count eighths. So that's 2 whole inches, and then 1/8, 2/8, 3/8. 2 3/8 inches. This one here, again, I can't just count quarters because I'll sail right by it. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. I can't just count halves, a half full, because I'll sail right by it. So I have to count the eighths. 1/8, 2/8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7/8. And it's 7/8 past 2 inches. So it's 2 7/8 of an inch. Very good. This one here, I could count that as 3 1/2/8. But again, I don't need to, because it's taller than the eighths. Because if that's a half, half of a half is a quarter, half of a quarter is an eighth, I can just count this to the nearest quarter. It's 1/4. So 3 1/4 is a better measurement. 3 2/8 isn't wrong, but 3 1/4 is better. If you were on a job site with my dad, he'd make fun of you if you said 2/8. He'd say you should say 3 1/4. And likewise with this one, I could count this as 1, 2, 3, 4/8. And I could say 3 4/8. That wouldn't be wrong, but they'd make fun of you. I could say it's 3 2/4, which again wouldn't be wrong, but they'd kind of laugh at you. because I can just count straight to the half, and I can say it is 3 1/2 inches. Good job. And let's look down here. This is our last example. Now this one, if you cut 1 inch in half, you get 1/2 inches. If you cut that in half, you get 1/4 inches. And a smaller pen here. So 1/2 inch. If you cut that in half, you get 1/4 inch. If you cut that in half, you get 1/8 of an inch. And if you cut that in half, you get 1/16 of an inch. And now we can do it again. To count to here, we could call that 2/16, but there's no reason to, because it's longer than 1/16. We can call that 1/8 of an inch. Here, we could call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/16. But remember, if we have an even number on top, we probably could have chosen a better way, because this is longer than 1/16, so we can call it 1, 2, 3/8. This, however, if I count by eighths here, I sail right by it because it's too short for that. So here we do have to count by 16ths, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9/16 of an inch. This measurement here is 1 whole inch, and then it is 1/16 past that. So 1 1/16 of an inch. This one, I also have to count 16ths because it's the shortest measurement here. If I go eighths, I'll sail right past it. If I go quarters, I'll sail right past it. If I go halves, I'll sail right past it. So I got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is 1 7/16 of an inch. This is 1 3/4 of an inch, because I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12/16, or I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/8. But since it's longer than that, just count the things as long as it are longer. 1, 2, 3. And those are halves, quarters, eighths, and 16ths. So that is 3/4. And if we keep going here, again, no reason to count the 16ths, no reason to count the eighths. We can just count the quarters, and it's only one of them, so 2 1/4. Here we do have to count the 16ths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 2 9/16. Here we don't have to count the 16ths, but we do have to count the eighths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 eighths. We're back to having to count 16ths here. So it's going to be 3 1, 2, 3/16. This is right in the middle. We only have to count the halves. So that's 3 1/2. And I can't count halves for this last one, but I can get away with just counting quarters. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4 of the way. So 3 3/4 of an inch. And there you go. Not the world's most exciting project, I will grant you, but a really important skill, and I think we actually have a really fun activity planned for the rest of this unit. So after a couple of days of stuff like this, you're going to do something that I think you'll really enjoy. But before you can do that thing that I think you'll really enjoy, you need to make sure that you have good practice with this. Oh, that's fun. So, work on this worksheet, and if you need any help, just let me know.